Many, like the Jews, do not say never, but not yet. Conscience will not let them say, we will never be religious and work for God, but they procrastinate, put off till tomorrow what should be done today, and thus leave the great work of life undone. The time is always come to him who wishes to do right. In his providence and by his prophets, God calls now. The present is the opportunity to respond, undertake, and finish the work which God has given us to do. This is a quote coming to you from the preacher's Homiletic commentary. In this broadcast, we are continuing our new series based on the theme, Striving for the Mastery. In this particular broadcast, we will use as our main text, Haggai 1, verses 2 to 5, which says, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, This people say, the time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Before getting into this broadcast, allow me to ask you, how are you living? Have you become distracted and discouraged? Are you always looking for more? Do you feel like you are wandering or like nothing seems to satisfy? What tends to distract you from your spiritual priorities today? God is calling each of us to a deeper spiritual commitment. But you must realize how easy it is to get caught up in your own plans, your own desires, and your own concerns. Okay, starting with Haggai 1:2. This is our main text. This is what it says. Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts. Now this designation of the Lord of hosts, this is one that is repeatedly used in Haggai. In fact, it occurs 14 times in this short book. Now this book consists of 2 chapters, yet in this short book, 14 times you will find the title or the designation for God as being the Lord of hosts. It is rendered Lord of hosts in English, but it can also mean Lord Almighty, the Yahweh of armies. And it speaks of his might and universal rule. It also emphasizes his greatness, and it represents the vast powers that he has at his disposal. But most importantly, it underlines why the people should listen to his word. Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, notice what the Lord of hosts says here. This people say. Now notice the contempt of his words there. Instead of saying, my people say, he says, this people say, as if they're not worthy to be called his people. It reflects his displeasure toward Judah at this time. Something is happening among Judah that God is displeased with. And something is happening among today's church that God is displeased with. And perhaps with some of you who are hearing this message, Something is happening in your life right now that God is displeased with. The Lord of hosts said, this people say, what is it that they were saying? They were saying the time is not come. The time is not come. We find them here making excuses for not obeying what the Lord told them to do. And as we dive in and search through the scriptures, we find that they had opposition. They were exiles in Babylon, and they came back by an edict given to them by King Cyrus, a Persian king, that they were to come back and build the temple, build Jerusalem. Well, they came back, they began the work, but they faced opposition from the enemy. They experienced dangers from the neighboring population. The Samaritans hindered them. The Persians were adverse to this undertaking. And so what happened was they became easily daunted by the opposition and easily discouraged. And so they just began to reason, to assume. They started talking among themselves and saying, well, perhaps it's not time. It's not God's time yet. And they started thinking that, well, maybe the 70-year captivity hasn't been completed yet. It's not ended, and it's just not the time. Well, that wasn't true because the captivity was completed. They were just trying to reason out why they were getting opposition, but they should have known. And we should know that anytime you do something for God, you are going to face opposition from the enemy. But they were using this as an excuse to stop the work of the Lord. Also, they were looking at their unfruitful season. They had bad trade and the worst harvest of all. But they didn't realize that that was a token of God's displeasure because of their negligence. And so they looked at all their difficulties and they came to the conclusion that God must not be in it. It's not God's time. And isn't that what we do sometimes? We encounter difficulties, obstacles, opposition from the enemy, and then we just assume that God must not be in it. We miss God. God must not have led us this way. But nothing could be further from the truth. This people say, the time is not come. How do we account for the delay in the work of reenacting the temple in Jerusalem? Well, first of all, we can see that the people had grown somewhat accustomed to being without the temple. You know, they figured, well, it won't hurt for us to be without a temple for some time, maybe a year or so, till things clear or calm down or clear out. And during this time, they became preoccupied in seeking to secure to themselves material prosperity. They concentrated on building their own homes and growing their own crops. They preferred the material and the temporal to the spiritual. Their ordinary occupation of life had more attraction for them than the duties of religion. Their zeal in temple building quickly damped. But that didn't happen in their everyday life. They had great enthusiasm in plowing and sowing their fields and working for their wages and erecting mansions and sumptuous palaces like they saw in Babylon. And they lived in Babylon with these walls of polished stone and roofs of cedar. They didn't lose their enthusiasm in doing that. What happened was they began to follow their own interests rather than the glory of God. The people say the time is not come. Haggai here quotes the popular expression of the people. This is what they were saying. It wasn't just one here, one there. It was everyone was saying this. The time is not come. They decided that rebuilding God's temple among his people wasn't that important right now. And Haggai was raised up by God to go to them. And he first of all accused the leaders of Jerusalem of their indifference toward this project. He laid the blame on them for making no attempt to renew the building campaign. And that's God's way. He will go first to the leaders, and he will accuse them first of all. And then we see that the leading classes became so preoccupied with their own interests and their own concerns that they felt no zeal to renew the building project. Now, something that's very important here that we have to take note of. These people were a holy remnant that came from Babylon, and they didn't object to rebuilding the temple. It wasn't like they were in total rebellion and saying, no, we're not going to do that. No, they objected to the timing of it. The root of their reluctance lay in their selfish indifference to the Lord. They wanted wealth for themselves and not a temple. They were charged with neglect in their work. They didn't question the call nor denied the obligation to duty, but they were criminal in delaying it and putting it off. They couldn't speak against the idea of building the temple, so what did they do? They spake against the timing. It's not time. The time has not come. Their crime is that they made excuses and entertained poor priorities. Their real problem was not that the people were in paneled houses. God was not displeased because they were living in these beautiful homes. God's not against that. He takes pleasure in the prosperity of his servants. But he was against them. He wasn't against them living in paneled houses, but he was against the fact that his temple was in ruins. The problem was wrongly ordered priorities. The people were actuated by selfishness. They were more concerned for themselves than for the cause of God. The preacher's homiletic commentary says, self-love will hinder all effort to repair and build the house of God. It is fatal to spiritual interests. Then we look at verses 3-4, and it says, then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house be waste? Haggai came to them with the word of the Lord, and he asked them, well, is it time for you to dwell in sealed houses? These sealed houses had ceilings that were paneled with fine woods. And this was a practice that was common for the residence of kings. And in contrast, here he was saying that the Lord's house lays in waste. Now here we have it that the people of Judah were living in houses fit for a king, while the King of Kings resided in a house fit for a pauper. Verse 5 goes on to say, now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, Here is the Lord of hosts speaking again. And he says to the people of Judah, consider your ways. Consider your ways. This is a Hebrew figure of speech that means put your heart on your roads or set your heart upon your ways. Don't think of them lightly, nor just as a passing thought, but fix your mind and your heart upon them. Consider your ways, what you have done, what you have been suffering, your present projects, and their consequences. Consider what direction your life is headed. Consider why some of you are never satisfied. Are you concerned more about what you want rather than what God is calling you to do? Consider carefully the consequences of your indifference. Now the Lord of hosts, he said, consider your ways. And then verse 6, he went on to say, you have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but you have not enough. You drink, but you are not filled with drink. You clothe you, but there is none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it into a bag with holes. Their failing to rebuild the temple had adversely impacted their lives. They were facing financial difficulties, and the cause of it was wrong priorities. Their priorities were out of order. They suffered setback after setback because the blessing of the Lord wasn't on their pocketbook. Instead of much, little was reaped. The little that they brought home melted away without doing any good. God was trying to tell them something. He frustrated their efforts because of their lack of concern for his glory. Oh, is there a message here for the American church today? People weren't focused on spiritual things. We're talking about Judah here. Judah was not focused on spiritual things. They were more concerned about what they wanted. Now, in closing, I ask you, are you focused on God or are you focused on other things? Are you focused on spiritual things or are you focused on your own desires? Are you neglecting God's plan for your life? Are you giving careful thought to your ways? God is speaking through this message. He is saying, give careful thought to your ways. What is your focus? Who are you living for? God is calling you to focus on spiritual things in life. The enemy will get you to focus on all the wrong things. But God, the Lord of hosts, is speaking, and he is saying, consider your ways. Make God, make Jesus, make the things of God a priority in your life. God is saying this today. The Lord of hosts is speaking. Can you hear him? He is saying to you, the time is now. Our time is up for today's broadcast, but I encourage you, stay tuned for our next teaching as we continue our study of the theme, Striving for the Mastery. This is Connie Giordano with Walking in Truth Ministry, praying that you will walk in the truth every day of your life. In Jesus' name, amen.